The first thing I heard was the tires. A violent screech tore through the quiet street, sharp, sudden, wrong in the way that only danger sounds wrong. One moment the night had been calm, just the distant hum of traffic and the soft glow of streetlights bleeding across wet pavement.
Stay close to me!
The next moment, the world broke open. Then came the gunshots. Pop, pop, pop. The sound cracked between the buildings so fast my body reacted before my brain did. I dropped. Palms against cold asphalt. Cheek grazing the road. The smell of burned rubber and gunpowder hit me at the same moment a man shoved past, nearly trampling me as the outdoor cafe behind me erupted into overturned chairs and screaming. Glass rained down somewhere to my left. A car slammed sideways into the curb. Smoke began to drift. I pressed myself flat and tried to breathe. That's when I saw him. He was lying a few feet from the wrecked car, one hand pressed against his side, blood already darkening his shirt. Around him, people scrambled and crawled and screamed. The whole street had become pure, animal panic. But he wasn't panicking. He lay completely still, watching the chaos unfold with the quiet focus of someone who had done this before, not survived it, done it, and his expression held none of the things it should have. No fear. No desperation. Just a cold, steady calculation behind dark eyes. Then he tried to move. His arm gave out. He dropped back against the pavement. The wound was bad. I didn't need medical training to know that. I just needed eyes. Another car roared around the corner. Doors slammed. Footsteps, deliberate, searching footsteps, moved through the street toward us. My instincts screamed at me to run. I crawled toward him instead. "Hey," I hissed. His gaze snapped to me instantly. Up close he looked even more like someone I should be afraid of, not because he threatened me, but because the way he studied my face in that half-second felt less like relief and more like threat assessment. "Go," he said. Quiet. Certain. "You'll bleed out before they find you." A beat. Something shifted in his jaw. Then, which way? I pointed toward the alley behind the bakery. He nodded once, the nod of someone accustomed to making fast decisions in bad situations, and when I pulled him upright, he was heavier than I expected and burning with heat, blood soaking immediately into my sleeve. But he steadied himself within 2 steps, and whatever had made him look wounded on the ground dissolved. The man moving through the dark beside me was not a victim. I didn't fully understand that yet. But I felt it. We made it into the alley as another shot rang out behind us. The brick wall swallowed the noise. The darkness closed in. We stopped beside a stack of wooden crates and I watched him lower himself down slowly, carefully, like a man accustomed to pain management. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Sirens began in the distance. He didn't look relieved. He looked the way people look when they're solving a problem they've seen before and don't like the answer to. Then his eyes found mine again. "Give me your hand," he said. I frowned. "What?" "Your hand." I held it out, confused. He turned it over, and with his thumb, unhurried, almost deliberate, he pressed a small mark of blood into my palm. A smear. Nothing more. "What is that?" I whispered. "A warning." His voice was low, factual. "If anyone from tonight saw your face, that mark won't mean anything. But if they come for you anyway, and they might, show it to whoever shows up first." He held my gaze. "Don't ask questions. Just show it." I stared at the blood on my palm. "Who are you?" He leaned back against the brick wall and closed his eyes for just a moment, not from exhaustion, I realized, but from something heavier. Resignation, maybe. The kind that came from knowing exactly what was coming next. "Someone," he said quietly, "who just made your life considerably more complicated." I didn't understand then. I would within 24 hours. When the entire Mafia came to my door. At first they were distant, weaving through the city like a warning carried on the wind. But within seconds they multiplied, one patrol car, then two, then what sounded like half the police force racing toward the scene we had just escaped. The wounded man beside me noticed it too. His head tilted slightly, listening. Then he sighed. Not in relief. In irritation. I frowned at him. Most people would be grateful to hear police sirens after a shooting. Most people would feel safe knowing help was on the way. But the man sitting beside me in that dim alleyway looked like the sirens were the last thing he wanted. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how cold the night had become. My jacket sleeve was soaked with his blood. The metallic smell of it clung to the air between us. You should go, he said again quietly. His voice was calm. Too calm. I stared at him, still trying to process the last 10 minutes of my life. 10 minutes ago I had been walking home from work. Now I was crouched in a dark alley beside a wounded stranger who had somehow survived a full street ambush without panicking once. And for some reason, he was telling me to run. I shook my head. Not until I know you're not going to bleed out, I said. The man looked at me for a long moment. Like he was trying to figure something out. You always help strangers in gunfights, he asked dryly. I let out a nervous laugh. No, I admitted. Usually my nights are a little less dramatic. He steadied my face again. And for the first time since the chaos started, his expression softened slightly. What's your name? He asked. Emma. The name felt strange leaving my mouth after everything that had just happened. Emma, he repeated quietly. Like he was testing how it sounded. And you are? I asked. He hesitated. For just a second. Then he said something that immediately made my nerves tighten. Someone who shouldn't be here. That wasn't an answer. I crossed my arms. Yeah, I figured that part out. Another siren screamed past the end of the alley. Blue and red lights flickered faintly against the brick walls. The man shifted slightly against the crate, pressing his hand harder against the wound in his side. His breathing remained controlled. But I could see the strain now. You're losing a lot of blood, I said quietly. He didn't respond. Instead, he looked toward the alley entrance again. Watching. Waiting. Like he expected danger to appear at any moment. I followed his gaze. The street beyond the alley was quieter now. The gunfire had stopped. Police voices echoed faintly in the distance as they began locking down the scene. But the tension in his posture didn't ease. If anything, it increased. Look, I said carefully, crouching beside him again. I live 2 blocks away. His eyes snapped back to me. It's not much, I continued quickly. Just a small apartment above a laundromat. But I've got a first aid kit in. No. The word came out firm. Sharp. You can't take me there. I blinked. Why not? His jaw tightened slightly. Because if anyone followed us, he said quietly, bringing me into your home would put you in danger. A chill crawled down my spine. You're already bleeding on my jacket, I said. He didn't smile. Exactly. For a moment we sat in silence. The city noise slowly returned around us. Sirens. Voices. Helicopters beginning to circle overhead. But inside that alley, the world felt strangely still. You said something earlier, I said slowly. He raised an eyebrow. When? When I pulled you out of the street. His gaze sharpened slightly. You said I shouldn't have done that. I meant it. Why? The man leaned back slightly against the wall, exhaling slowly. For a moment, I thought he might ignore the question entirely. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. Because the men who attacked tonight, he said quietly, don't leave loose ends. A cold sensation spread through my chest. Loose ends. You mean witnesses? I asked. His silence was answer enough. The alley suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. So if they saw me help you, I whispered. He nodded once. They'll come looking. My throat tightened. Well, that's comforting. His gaze softened slightly. I warned you to leave. I rubbed my temples. This is insane. A few minutes ago, I had been worried about paying next month's rent. Now I was apparently being hunted by people I had never even seen. All I did was help someone who was shot, I said. Yes, he replied. And now those people might come after me. Yes. I stared at him. You're very calm about this. His expression remained unreadable. I've had practice. That answer sent another uneasy wave through me. Because it suggested something obvious. This man didn't just stumble into danger. Danger followed him. Everywhere. Who are you? I asked again. He didn't answer. Instead, he slowly pushed himself to his feet. The movement made him wince slightly, but he managed to stay upright. Even injured, he carried himself like someone used to being in control. Tall. Steady. Commanding. You should go home, he said. And pretend tonight never happened. I laughed nervously. That seems unlikely. He looked at me again. Longer this time. Like he was trying to decide something. Then he said quietly, You don't know who you've just saved. The words hung in the air between us. My stomach tightened. But they will find you next. A chill crawled down my spine. Who will? I asked. But he was already moving. Slowly walking toward the alley exit. Like the conversation was over. Wait, I said, stepping after him. He stopped. But didn't turn around. You're just going to leave? I asked. That would be the safest option for you. That's not an answer. Finally, he glanced back over his shoulder. And for the first time, I noticed something I had missed earlier. The look in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something far more unsettling. Concern. You helped me tonight, he said quietly. And I won't forget that. Then he stepped out of the alley and disappeared into the flashing lights of the street. Just like that. Leaving me standing alone in the dim glow of the alley lamp. My heart still pounding. My jacket still stained with his blood. And one terrifying thought echoing through my mind. You don't know who you've just saved. But they will find you next. I slowly stepped out of the alley and looked toward the street. Police officers were everywhere now. Yellow tape stretched across the road. Flashing lights painted the buildings red and blue. But the man I had just helped was gone. Completely gone. Like he had vanished into the night. I stood there for a long moment, trying to convince myself the whole thing had been some kind of surreal nightmare. But when I looked down and saw the blood soaking through my sleeve, reality came rushing back. Something very dangerous had just happened. And somehow, I had become part of it. What I didn't know then was that the stranger I had just saved wasn't just some random victim of a street attack. And that by the time the sun rose the next morning, the most powerful Mafia family in the city would know exactly where I lived. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Even after I made it home and locked my apartment door behind me, the echoes of gunfire still rang in my ears. Every sound outside my window made me flinch. Every car that slowed in the street made my heart race. By the time the sky began to turn gray with the first hint of morning, I was sitting at the small kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. My jacket lay draped over the back of the chair. The sleeve was stiff with dried blood. His blood. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself the whole thing had been some strange nightmare. But the smell of iron still clung to the fabric, which meant it was real. Everything about last night was real. The shooting. The wrecked car. The wounded stranger with the calm, calculating eyes. And the warning he left behind. You don't know who you've just saved, but they will find you next. I rubbed my temples. Great, I muttered to the empty apartment. Just great. My life before last night had been simple. Not glamorous. Not exciting. But simple. I worked long shifts at a small restaurant downtown. Waitressing wasn't exactly the dream career I imagined when I was younger, but it paid the bills most months. My apartment sat above a laundromat on a narrow side street. The walls were thin. The furniture was mismatched. And the heater made a strange knocking sound every time it turned on. But it was home. Safe. Predictable. Normal. At least, it had been. I stood up and walked to the small window overlooking the street. The laundromat sign buzzed quietly below, casting a pale blue glow across the sidewalk. Everything looked the same as always. People walking to work. Cars passing by. The city beginning another ordinary morning. And yet, something felt different. Like the world had shifted slightly overnight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That something had followed me home. I shook my head, trying to clear the thought. Stop being paranoid, I whispered. But deep down, I knew the feeling wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. And instincts don't appear for no reason. Just as I turned away from the window, a knock echoed through the apartment. 3 sharp taps. My entire body froze. Another knock followed. Slower this time. Deliberate. My heart began to pound. No one ever came here this early. Not friends. Not neighbors. And definitely not strangers. I stared at the door. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, pretending I wasn't home. But something told me whoever stood outside already knew I was inside. The knock came again. This time softer. I slowly walked across the apartment. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I hesitated. Then I leaned forward and looked through the small peephole. And immediately felt my breath catch. It was him. The man from the alley. He stood in the hallway outside my apartment. Still wearing the same dark clothes. Still pale from blood loss. But standing upright. Strong. Alert. Like the injury from last night had never happened. For a moment I just stared at him through the peephole, trying to understand how he had found me. Then he spoke quietly through the door. I know you're there, Emma. My stomach tightened. I slowly unlocked the door and opened it. He stepped inside immediately, closing the door behind him. The small apartment suddenly felt very crowded. Up close, he looked different in daylight. More imposing. Taller than I remembered. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and the exhaustion in his eyes suggested he hadn't slept either. But what struck me most was the way he carried himself. Even injured, even exhausted. He radiated control. Relax, he said quietly. I'm not here to hurt you. That's reassuring, I replied. Because usually men who show up at my door at 6 in the morning aren't bringing good news. His eyes flickered with something almost like amusement. Then his hand moved to his side. And he winced. I frowned immediately. You reopened the wound. He looked down briefly. Looks like it. I sighed. Sit. He hesitated. Then walked over to the small couch and lowered himself carefully onto it. I grabbed the first aid kit from under the kitchen sink and returned. As I lifted his shirt to examine the wound, I felt my pulse quicken. The bandage he'd wrapped around himself during the night was soaked through. How are you even standing right now? I muttered. Adrenaline, he said calmly. And stubbornness. I cleaned the wound carefully. The silence between us felt heavy. But strangely, not uncomfortable. After a few minutes, he spoke. You shouldn't have helped me. You mentioned that already. I meant it. Well, I said, tightening the bandage, it's a little late to take it back now. His eyes lifted to mine. For a moment we held each other's gaze. There was something different in his expression now. Not just calculation. Something softer. "Thank you," he said quietly. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. "You're welcome." For a moment, the tension between us shifted. The danger of last night faded slightly, leaving behind something quieter, more personal. Then his phone vibrated. The sound shattered the moment instantly. He pulled the device from his pocket and glanced at the screen. His expression hardened. He stood immediately. "Stay here." "What?" But he had already moved to the window, peering through the blinds toward the street below. I followed his gaze. And that's when I noticed them. 2 black cars parked across the street. The engines running. Men standing beside them. Men in dark suits. Watching the building. My stomach dropped. "Friends of yours?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "No." My heart began to race again. "Then who are they?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for his phone again and typed a quick message. Less than 30 seconds later, another set of headlights appeared at the end of the street. A sleek black SUV pulled up beside the laundromat. 4 men stepped out. These ones were different. Larger. More alert. Each one scanning the street with professional precision. They moved quickly toward the building entrance. My pulse quickened. "What's happening?" I whispered. The man beside me exhaled slowly. "My security team." "Security team." I stared at him. "You have a security team?" "Yes." The door downstairs opened. Heavy footsteps climbed the staircase. Then a knock came at my apartment door. This one firm. Professional. The man beside me opened it. 4 men entered immediately. Each one dressed in dark suits. Each one carrying the quiet confidence of someone trained for violence. "Boss," the tallest one said. "We have the perimeter." "Boss." The word echoed in my head. I looked from the bodyguards back to the man sitting in my living room. Something inside me began to connect the pieces. The calm during the shooting. The enemies. The security team. The bodyguards. "You're not just some random guy who got caught in a street fight," I said slowly. He met my gaze. "No." Silence filled the room. "Then who are you?" The bodyguards shifted slightly. Waiting. Watching. Finally, the man sighed. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "My name is Mateo DeLuca." The name meant nothing to me at first. But the bodyguards' reactions did. Every one of them straightened slightly. Like soldiers standing before a general. Mateo studied my face carefully. "You've probably heard rumors about me." I shook my head slowly. "Should I have?" His lips curved slightly. "Most people have." He stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the seriousness in his eyes. "The men who attacked me last night," he said quietly, "work for people who would kill anyone standing in their way." My throat tightened. "And now," he continued, "you're standing in their way too." The reality of the situation finally hit me all at once. The shooting. The warning. The bodyguards. The enemies. This wasn't just some criminal dispute. This was something bigger. Much bigger. And somehow, without realizing it, I had stepped directly into the middle of it. I looked toward the street again. At the men still watching the building. Watching my building. Then back at Mateo. And that's when I realized something terrifying. They weren't just after him anymore. They were watching my home. My life. My door. And that's when I realized. They weren't just after him. They were coming for me too. The penthouse felt unreal. Like I had stepped into someone else's life. Someone richer. More powerful. More dangerous. Bodyguards moved quietly through the rooms. Phones rang constantly. Men spoke in low voices about security routes and surveillance updates. The entire place felt like a command center preparing for war. And somehow, I was standing in the middle of it. Mateo sat across from me at a long glass table. A glass of whiskey untouched in front of him. "You should rest," he said. "I'm not tired." That was a lie. But my mind was racing too fast to sleep. "Then ask your questions," he said calmly. I laughed softly. "You sure about that?" "Yes." I leaned forward slightly. "All right. First question. Who exactly are you?" Mateo studied me for a moment. Then answered simply. "My family controls one of the largest criminal networks in Europe." The words landed like a bomb. "You're serious?" "Yes." "And the men who attacked you?" "Rivals." "How serious are these rivals?" He held my gaze. "Serious enough to start a war." I leaned back slowly, trying to process that. "You weren't exaggerating when you said people would come after me." "No." Silence settled between us. Then Mateo slid a small folder across the table. "Before tonight," he said, "we ran a background check on you." I frowned. "You what?" "It's necessary." I opened the folder. Inside were documents. Photos. Information about my life. My school. My old addresses. Even details about my parents. My stomach tightened. "Why do you have this?" Mateo's expression shifted slightly. "Because something about you didn't make sense." I flipped through the papers. Then stopped. At a photograph. An old black and white image of a man standing beside a luxury car. The name printed beneath it made my heart skip. It was my grandfather. But the description underneath wasn't what I expected. Antonio Valenti, financial advisor to the DeLuca family. I looked up slowly. "That's impossible." Mateo leaned forward. "It isn't. My grandfather was an accountant." "Yes. For my family." The room suddenly felt smaller. "Wait, you're saying my family?" He nodded. "Has been connected to mine for decades." I stared down at the photo again. The man I remembered as a quiet old grandfather had apparently worked for one of the most powerful Mafia families in Europe. How did I never know this? I whispered. Mateo's voice softened slightly. "Because your grandfather disappeared before you were born." A chill ran through me. "Disappeared?" "Yes." "Why?" Mateo hesitated. Then said quietly. "Because someone betrayed us." My pulse quickened. "And you think my grandfather had something to do with it?" "No." He slid another document across the table. "This is why." It was a bank document. A massive account. Hidden. Protected. In Switzerland. My name was listed under it. My hands began to shake. "What is this?" Mateo's voice dropped to a whisper. "An inheritance your grandfather hid before he vanished." "How much money is this?" Mateo didn't answer. But his silence told me enough. A fortune. Big enough to start wars. Big enough to make enemies. I leaned back slowly. My entire life. I thought I was just a waitress struggling to pay rent. Mateo watched me carefully. "And now?" I shook my head in disbelief. "Now it looks like I've been sitting on a Mafia fortune without even knowing it." Before Mateo could respond, one of the bodyguards rushed into the room. "Boss." Mateo stood immediately. "What is it?" The guard hesitated, then said something that made the entire room fall silent. "We've intercepted communications." Mateo's eyes narrowed. "From who?" The guard looked uneasy. From inside our own organization. A chill ran down my spine. Someone close to us is feeding information to your enemies. Mateo's jaw tightened. Do we know who? The guard hesitated, then slowly nodded. And that's when I felt my stomach drop. Because the name he whispered was someone Mateo trusted completely. I looked back toward Mateo, my heart racing. And suddenly a terrifying thought formed in my mind. If the betrayal came from inside his own circle, then nowhere was safe. Not the penthouse. Not the bodyguards. Not even the people standing closest to him. And that's when I realized something even worse. The person I trusted most could be the one trying to kill him. The penthouse no longer felt like a safe place. After the bodyguard whispered the name of the suspected traitor, the atmosphere changed instantly. Men who had been standing casually near the windows were now gripping their weapons. Phones rang nonstop. Security feeds flickered across the large screens in the control room down the hall. Every person inside the building understood the same thing. If someone inside Mateo's organization had betrayed him, then the enemy already knew where we were. Mateo stood silently near the window overlooking the city. The lights of downtown reflected in the glass behind him. For the first time since I met him, I saw something darker in his expression. Not fear. Not panic. Cold calculation. How long have they known? He asked the guard. We're still tracing the communications, the guard replied. But it looks like the leak started yesterday. Yesterday. Which meant the attack on the street hadn't been random. It had been planned. Carefully. Mateo nodded slowly. Then they'll come tonight. The guard didn't argue. Everyone in the room already knew it. Mateo turned toward his men. Lock down every entrance, he said calmly. Double the perimeter guards. The men moved instantly. Doors slammed. Weapons were checked. Orders echoed through the penthouse like a military operation. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. This wasn't the first time Mateo had prepared for war. He knew exactly what to do. Which meant this kind of danger was normal in his world. I stepped closer to him. So what happens now? Mateo glanced at me. We prepare. For what? His voice remained steady. For an attack. A cold chill ran through me. You're serious? Yes. Maybe we should call the police. The faintest smile appeared on his lips. Emma, the police don't handle problems like this. Before I could respond, one of the security screens suddenly flashed. A guard shouted from the hallway. Boss! Mateo turned instantly. The guard pointed at the monitor. 5 black SUVs had just pulled onto the street outside the tower. The same type of vehicles I had seen the night before. Only this time, there were more of them. Much more. Men began stepping out. Armed. Organized. Moving with military precision. My heart started racing. That's them, I whispered. Mateo didn't answer. But the tension in his shoulders confirmed it. His enemies had arrived. The first explosion came seconds later. A thunderous boom shook the entire building. Glass rattled in the window frames. The elevator alarm screamed. Lower parking level, someone shouted. Mateo moved immediately. Everyone to defensive positions. His bodyguards spread through the penthouse. Weapons drawn. Eyes sharp. I stood frozen in the center of the room. The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere below. Rapid. Violent. Echoing through the concrete structure of the tower. My hands began to shake. Mateo noticed instantly. Emma. His voice cut through the chaos. I looked up. Stay behind me. Another explosion echoed through the building. Closer this time. The lights flickered. One of the guards ran into the room. They breached the lower floors. Mateo grabbed a handgun from the table. The movement was smooth, effortless, like he had done it 1,000 times before. "Hold them at the stairwells," he ordered. The guard nodded and ran. Gunfire continued below. The sound echoed up the staircases. Closer. Closer. And suddenly, the penthouse doors burst open. 3 armed men rushed inside. Mateo fired instantly. The first shot echoed through the room like thunder. One attacker collapsed before he even crossed the doorway. His bodyguards moved in perfect synchronization. 2 more gunshots. The other attackers fell. My ears rang from the noise. The smell of gunpowder filled the air again. Just like the street the night before. Mateo grabbed my arm. "We're leaving." "What? Now?" Another guard ran toward us. "They're pushing through the south stairwell." Mateo nodded. "Then we take the roof." The roof. I barely had time to think before we were running down a long corridor. Bodyguards surrounding us on all sides. My pulse quickened. "And you think my grandfather had something to do with it?" "No." He slid another document across the table. "This is why." It was a bank document. A massive account. Hidden. Protected. In Switzerland. My name was listed under it. My hands began to shake. "What is this?" Mateo's voice dropped to a whisper. "An inheritance your grandfather hid before he vanished." "How much money is this?" Mateo didn't answer. But his silence told me enough. A fortune. Big enough to start wars. Big enough to make enemies. I leaned back slowly. My entire life. I thought I was just a waitress struggling to pay rent. Mateo watched me carefully. "And now?" I shook my head in disbelief. "Now it looks like I've been sitting on a Mafia fortune without even knowing it." Before Mateo could respond, one of the bodyguards rushed into the room. "Boss." Mateo stood immediately. "What is it?" The guard hesitated, then said something that made the entire room fall silent. "We've intercepted communications." Mateo's eyes narrowed. "From who?" The guard looked uneasy. "From inside our own organization." A chill ran down my spine. "Someone close to us is feeding information to your enemies." Mateo's jaw tightened. "Do we know who?" The guard hesitated, then slowly nodded. And that's when I felt my stomach drop. Because the name he whispered was someone Mateo trusted completely. I looked back toward Mateo, my heart racing. And suddenly a terrifying thought formed in my mind. If the betrayal came from inside his own circle, then nowhere was safe. Not the penthouse. Not the bodyguards. Not even the people standing closest to him. And that's when I realized something even worse. The person I trusted most could be the one trying to kill him. The penthouse no longer felt like a safe place. After the bodyguard whispered the name of the suspected traitor, the atmosphere changed instantly. Men who had been standing casually near the windows were now gripping their weapons. Phones rang nonstop. Security feeds flickered across the large screens in the control room down the hall. Every person inside the building understood the same thing. If someone inside Mateo's organization had betrayed him, then the enemy already knew where we were. Mateo stood silently near the window overlooking the city. The lights of downtown reflected in the glass behind him. For the first time since I met him, I saw something darker in his expression. Not fear. Not panic. Cold calculation. "How long have they known?" he asked the guard. "We're still tracing the communications," the guard replied. "But it looks like the leak started yesterday." Yesterday. Which meant the attack on the street hadn't been random. It had been planned. Carefully. Mateo nodded slowly. Then they'll come tonight. The guard didn't argue. Everyone in the room already knew it. Mateo turned toward his men. Lock down every entrance, he said calmly. Double the perimeter guards. The men moved instantly. Doors slammed. Weapons were checked. Orders echoed through the penthouse like a military operation. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. This wasn't the first time Mateo had prepared for war. He knew exactly what to do, which meant this kind of danger was normal in his world. I stepped closer to him. So what happens now? Mateo glanced at me. We prepare. For what? His voice remained steady. For an attack. A cold chill ran through me. You're serious? Yes. Maybe we should call the police. The faintest smile appeared on his lips. Emma, the police don't handle problems like this. Before I could respond, one of the security screens suddenly flashed. A guard shouted from the hallway. Boss! Mateo turned instantly. The guard pointed at the monitor. 5 black SUVs had just pulled onto the street outside the tower. The same type of vehicles I had seen the night before. Only this time, there were more of them. Much more. Men began stepping out. Armed. Organized. Moving with military precision. My heart started racing. That's them, I whispered. Mateo didn't answer. But the tension in his shoulders confirmed it. His enemies had arrived. The first explosion came seconds later. A thunderous boom shook the entire building. Glass rattled in the window frames. The elevator alarm screamed. Lower parking level, someone shouted. Mateo moved immediately. Everyone to defensive positions. His bodyguards spread through the penthouse. Weapons drawn. Eyes sharp. I stood frozen in the center of the room. The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere below. Rapid. Violent. Echoing through the concrete structure of the tower. My hands began to shake. Mateo noticed instantly. Emma. His voice cut through the chaos. I looked up. Stay behind me. Another explosion echoed through the building. Closer this time. The lights flickered. One of the guards ran into the room. They breached the lower floors. Mateo grabbed a handgun from the table. The movement was smooth. Effortless. Like he had done it 1,000 times before. Hold them at the stairwells, he ordered. The guard nodded and ran. Gunfire continued below. The sound echoed up the staircases. Closer. Closer. And suddenly, the penthouse doors burst open. 3 armed men rushed inside. Mateo fired instantly. The first shot echoed through the room like thunder. One attacker collapsed before he even crossed the doorway. His bodyguards moved in perfect synchronization. 2 more gunshots. The other attackers fell. My ears rang from the noise. The smell of gunpowder filled the air again. Just like the street the night before. Mateo grabbed my arm. We're leaving. What? Now. Another guard ran toward us. They're pushing through the south stairwell. Mateo nodded. Then we take the roof. The roof. I barely had time to think before we were running down a long corridor. Bodyguards surrounding us on all sides. Gunfire echoed behind us as more attackers entered the building. The emergency stairwell door slammed open. We rushed upward. Floor after floor. My lungs burned. My legs trembled. But the fear pushing me forward was stronger than exhaustion. When we reached the rooftop door, Mateo kicked it open. Cold night air rushed over us. The city stretched out in every direction. Lights. Traffic. Helicopters already circling above. One of Mateo's guards pointed across the roof. A helicopter is on the way. Gunshots echoed from the stairwell below. The enemy had followed us. Mateo turned toward his men. Hold them here. The guards formed a defensive line near the door. Weapons raised. Determined. Ready. Mateo pulled me behind a large ventilation unit. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. I stared at him. For what? For dragging you into this. Another burst of gunfire echoed behind us. You didn't drag me, I said quietly. I chose to help you. His eyes met mine. For a moment the chaos around us faded. You shouldn't have, he said softly. Why? Because now they'll never stop hunting you. The honesty in his voice made my chest tighten. But something else had changed inside me tonight. The fear was still there. But it wasn't controlling me anymore. I looked him straight in the eyes. Then we make sure they fail. Mateo steadied me for a moment. And slowly, he smiled. Not the cold smile of a mafia boss. Something warmer. Something real. You're stronger than you think, he said. Gunfire exploded again behind us. The guards shouted. They're coming through. Mateo pulled me closer. For a moment his hand rested against my cheek. A brief, quiet moment in the middle of war. You saved my life, he said. And tonight, I realized something. What? His voice dropped to a whisper. I've been depending on you ever since. My breath caught. The confession hung in the air between us. Fear. Attraction. Danger. Everything tangled together. Then the rooftop door exploded open. More attackers rushed out. The guards fired. The rooftop erupted into chaos. Gunshots flashed in the darkness. Men shouted. Bullets struck metal and concrete. And in the middle of it all, the helicopter blades finally appeared above us. The aircraft descended slowly toward the rooftop. Wind whipped across the building. Mateo grabbed my hand. Come on. We ran toward the landing point. But just as we reached the helicopter, a final gunshot echoed behind us. One of Mateo's guards fell. And the enemy leader stepped out from the stairwell. Gun raised. Eyes locked on Mateo. The moment froze. One bullet. One decision. 1 second that could change everything. Mateo stepped slightly in front of me, shielding me with his body. The enemy smirked. You should have stayed dead, DeLuca. Mateo's voice remained calm. You should have stayed loyal. The man pulled the trigger. And in that exact moment, everything changed. Because what happened next would seal both our fates. Forever. The gunshot echoed across the rooftop like thunder. For a split second, everything moved in slow motion. The enemy leader's finger tightened on the trigger. Mateo stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. And I realized something terrifying. He wasn't trying to dodge the bullet. He was ready to take it. But before the shot could reach him, another gun fired. A sharp crack cut through the air from the side of the rooftop. The enemy leader jerked violently. His weapon slipped from his hand. Then his body collapsed onto the concrete. Silence followed. For a moment, no one moved. Then the remaining attackers began retreating toward the stairwell. The few guards Mateo still had standing quickly disarmed them. Within seconds the rooftop battle was over. The helicopter blades continued spinning above us. Wind whipping across the rooftop. But the war, at least for tonight, was finished. I looked around slowly. The concrete floor was scattered with shell casings. 2 of Mateo's guards were injured but alive. The attackers had either fled or been captured. And the man who had tried to kill us lay motionless near the stairwell door. Mateo stood completely still beside me, processing everything. Then he turned toward the side of the rooftop where the second gunshot had come from. Marco stepped forward. The silver-haired man lowered the pistol in his hand. The same calm expression remained on his face. "I thought you might need assistance," he said. Mateo stared at him. For a moment I thought there might be anger in his eyes. But instead, he nodded. "Good timing." Marco gave a slight smile. The traitor confessed. My heart skipped. Mateo's voice sharpened. "Who?" Marco looked toward the captured attackers being restrained by the guards. "One of our lieutenants," he said. "The man who handled security communications." The realization settled over the rooftop like a heavy fog. The betrayal had been real. But the worst part was over. Mateo exhaled slowly. For how long? Months. And now? Marco's expression hardened. He won't betray anyone again. Mateo nodded once. Justice in this world didn't come from courtrooms. It came from loyalty. And consequences. The helicopter finally touched down on the rooftop. The pilot leaned out the door. "Sir, we should leave before the police arrive." Mateo looked at the city skyline. Blue police lights were already flashing several blocks away. Then he turned toward me. "You're coming with me." I raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound like a question. It isn't. I hesitated. Just for a moment. Because standing on that rooftop, I realized something important. 24 hours ago my life had been small. Predictable. Safe. But it had also been fragile. One paycheck away from falling apart. Now everything was different. I had seen a world of power. Danger. Secrets. And people who controlled cities from the shadows. And somehow, I was standing in the center of it. Mateo studied my expression carefully. "You can walk away from this," he said quietly. "Once we leave tonight, I'll make sure you're protected. You can go back to your old life." My old life. The small apartment. The long shifts at the restaurant. The quiet nights alone. For a moment I imagined returning to that world. Pretending none of this had ever happened. But then I looked at Mateo. At the man who had stood between me and a bullet. The man who had trusted me when he had every reason not to. And suddenly the answer became clear. I shook my head slowly. No. Mateo's eyes narrowed slightly. No? I'm not going back. The wind from the helicopter blades whipped through my hair as I stepped closer to him. "You once told me I didn't know who I saved," I said. "That's true. And maybe I didn't know what world you belonged to." His gaze softened slightly. "But now I do." I glanced at the city lights stretching endlessly across the horizon. A world full of danger. But also possibility. Then I looked back at him. And I'm not running anymore. Silence hung between us for a moment. Then Mateo did something I hadn't seen him do before. He smiled. Not the cold, calculated smile of a Mafia leader. But something genuine. "You realize," he said quietly, "this life doesn't come with easy exits." I figured that out already. He extended his hand toward me. An invitation. A partnership. A future neither of us had expected. I took it. His grip was warm. Strong. Certain. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something stronger than fear. Confidence. Because the woman who had dragged a wounded stranger off the street wasn't the same person standing here now. I had seen the truth. The danger. The power. And somehow, I had survived it. Marco cleared his throat behind us. "Sir, we really should go." Mateo nodded. He helped me into the helicopter first. Then climbed in beside me. As the aircraft lifted off the rooftop, the city lights grew smaller below us. The tower where everything had nearly ended faded into the distance. But strangely, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. It felt like I was stepping into something new. Mateo sat beside me, watching the skyline. Your life is about to change, he said quietly. I smiled slightly. It already has. He looked at me. You're not afraid? I considered the question. Maybe I should have been. This world was dangerous. Unpredictable. But something inside me had shifted tonight. Fear had been replaced by something stronger. Resolve. I leaned back in the helicopter seat and looked out at the glowing city below. Then I said the words that would define everything that came next. I never imagined that helping a stranger would drag me into a world of power, danger, and love. I turned toward Mateo. But I wasn't running anymore. His hand tightened gently around mine. And as the helicopter disappeared into the night sky above the city, I realized something extraordinary. I wasn't just surviving his world anymore. I was standing beside him in it. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Do you think Emma made the right choice, standing beside Mateo instead of walking away? Comment stay if you would have stayed. Comment run if you would have left. I read every comment.